Alright, moving on to dropping in the distributor and actually getting it set up where this engine will run when we go to fire it. In classic form, I should have taken the opportunity with the valve cover off to get to top dead center, where on cylinder number 1 right here, when both those valve springs were not compressed, we would have been able to know on our harmonic balancer that we were on top dead center. But all's not lost, and I'm just going to take the lazy way out here, which is another good method to find top dead center. Is you can remove the cylinder number 1 spark plug here, and then if you take your thumb and put it over the hole and turn the engine over by hand, you'll start to feel that compression where it's trying to blow your thumb off, and then you know you're on the compression stroke, and you'll watch for the timing marks, and then you'll know you're all set where you're supposed to be. Alright, and what I'm going to try and do here is set this guy up to about, I'm going to stop at about 5 degrees, just so you know we're going to run about 8 degrees of advance minimum for our initial timing. So we'll just start at this point, and it'll help us get our distributor dropped in the right place. So I think we're good to go. We're on the compression stroke. We can drop that guy in. Alright, so we're getting all ready to drop our distributor in here. And this particular unit is a Pertronix Igniter 3 billet distributor. Now what I like about this unit in particular is if you leave your key on, it's not going to fry the module. So that's one nice piece about the Igniter 3 unit. And you can read up quite a bit about Pertronix. They're a pretty good and reputable company at this point. And what I really like about them is they make this Igniter 3 module that you can put in an old points distributor. And that's just really nice for not needing to do a lot of modifications to have a pretty good electronic ignition system. And you can always keep points in the dash in case the module would burn out, so you wouldn't be stranded on the side of the road. But this one in particular is a full billet unit, so we don't have that option. I ran it before, and it's done pretty well for me. Now, one thing to keep in mind with these Fords, or really with any other engine that you'd be working with, is you want to keep in mind you know, what style of camshaft you're running. So your cam gear, or your distributor gear here rather, needs to be a certain material depending on if you're running a flat tappet or a roller cam. And I do have a video where I go more in depth in this, but basically you do need a steel gear if you have a roller cam, which this engine does. So one way you can tell between a steel gear and a cast gear, which would be for the flat tappet cam, is the steel gear you can look and it has machining lines, and obviously the cast gear you can look and it definitely looks like a casting. So they're real easy to tell, and you really don't want to make that mistake. So anyway, I'm dropping this guy in here. You want to make a mark on the distributor body where cylinder 1 is going to be, which I've already done. Now with the way these gears are designed, when you drop it in, this distributor head is going to want to turn and rotate in. So we're going to clock it a little bit before where our cylinder 1 spark plug wire is on our cap. Get this guy out of the way. They rotate quite a bit, as you can see. And there we go, nothing to it. She's in and clocked properly. Now this just gets you close. Of course you can rotate your distributor body, but ideally, you know, you want your distributor to be in the proper orientation, which for a Ford, this is pretty good. Now one final thing about our distributor here that I can't stress enough is it's really important to use a quality distributor. You know, those units you can go and pick up for like 50 bucks or so. They're complete junk, and I highly recommend getting something from MSD, from a reputable source, you know, through Summit, so you're not getting a cheap knockoff. Or, you know, Pertronix is pretty good, just something decent. Those HEI styles that are super cheap from like Speedway or whatever, you know, those have a tendency to snap, shear, they're complete junk. So always make sure you're using a quality unit. You'll thank yourself later on in the end. Alright, so one interesting thing to note here about these small block Ford engines is that the 302 and the 351 had different firing orders, except for a few exceptions. Now, once they went to the roller cam engines in the 302 setup, they did have some engines, which were called the HO or the high output, which used the 351 firing order, which really is a better balanced firing order overall. Now in 94, they did switch over to all the engines having the 351 style firing order, or the HO firing order, if you will. But you know, this unit here being a 94, it is the changeover year, which I actually forgot. And Kevin, he's or I guess as you know him as Junkyard Diggs, he's deployed right now, but he sent me a message and said, hey, don't forget that that is a 94 engine, and it's all flipped around on that guy. So I got this all loomed up for the old school 7 and 8 firing order. So I really need to switch these plug wires around, make sure we got the right firing order on this guy, assuming he's right, and then get it all loomed up and we'll be good to go. Now I hate to admit it, but I got in a little bit of a rush and just made a few assumptions regarding the firing order. Now there's a quick way to verify this on your small block Ford engine or any engine that has multiple firing orders as to what firing order your cam is set up for. So the only thing you have to do is have the distributor dropped in where the rotor is pointing to the cylinder 1 plug wire location when the engine is on the compression stroke of cylinder 1. So essentially what you have to do when you install the distributor anyway, and pretty much what we showed earlier in the video with installing the distributor. Now all you have to do is pick another plug wire in the firing sequence that you believe to be correct. Now when that rotor is pointing to the plug wire's location on the cap, that associated cylinder should be on the compression stroke. Now earlier I showed a very simple way to verify the compression stroke with your finger, which will be useful here again. Now if you feel compression, the order is correct. If not, well, chances are you have the wrong firing order. All right, getting everything all hooked up. I'll go ahead and loom it up later. I'm sure, you know, with how the rest of this truck is, I'll probably end up looming it up with zip ties. But anyway, those pre-cut units do a pretty good job. They're a little on the long side, but it's better than being on the short side. And they're not too awful long, so I think we can make do with them. Right now we're testing the voltage to the coil, so the mice haven't chewed it up too bad with the key on the positive post on the coil and the negative of the battery, which you need to do to test the voltage to the coil properly. We're seeing we got about 12 volts, so I'm happy with that. Alright, so as you saw, we are indeed getting power to the coil, so I'm going to drop a quick tech tip here in case you're trying to start something up and you don't have ignition. So this is a really good way to test the coil and make sure it's still good, so we know we have power to it. And what I've done is I've hooked an additional ground cable, kind of wedged in here so I could do this with one hand, onto the negative side of the coil. And now we're going to find a grounded surface. So the engine block here is connected through the body is connected back to the negative side of the battery. So we're completing the circuit, and when I rub this against this grounded surface, it's going to simulate what the distributor does. So as you see here, as we go through, you can hear it. It's going to interrupt that coil. We should see that spark plug spark. Now the camera's not picking up super good. I'm sure you can see it a few times. But anyway, our coil's doing its job, and if our ignition module's in good shape, we should be good to go. Alright, so I guess I'm throwing in a lot of tech tips and a lot of my tricks and secrets here today, so pay attention because this is a really cool one. So what people are usually concerned with is when they fire up the engine, they don't want to be danced around with a timing light, and they want to be close. And if you're familiar with ignition timing, just a little turn of this guy is, it goes a long way. So you really want to be pretty close when you go ahead and fire the engine, especially if you're going to end up doing a break-in process where you're holding the thing at 2,000 RPM for a while with a flat tappet camshaft. You don't want to be trying to do that and dance around with a timing light. It just gets pretty hairy. So what we're going to do here is get as close as we possibly can. There's a trick to this. So what we have is our spark plug number 1 on a grounded surface here. We have our ignition on, so our coil's hot. And now we're just going to rotate our distributor back and forth. And right there, you can see that spark plug sparking, which you got to keep going back and forth. You have to interrupt the coil just like you saw earlier. So eventually you can hone it in. Your rotations get smaller and smaller. All right, there we go. Now I'm confident when we fire it, we're going to be very close to top dead center where we want to be. And I actually have the engine advanced 5 degrees on the harmonic balancer, so I know we're going to be on the positive side of our ignition timing. With our fuel system good, our distributor is still loose, but it's tight enough that it's not going to spin on its own when we try and start the engine. So at this point, let's fire this thing up and see what happens. I'm hopeful that it doesn't take a whole lot, maybe one pump and she lights right off. As you saw as we went through, everything should be set up properly and pretty close to where it needs to be. All right, here we go. Neutral, got ignition on, give it a pump. There we go, hold it at some RPM here. Oil pressure's coming up. I hope it goes a little bit more than that. This is a used engine, so far so good. Let's see if it'll just idle right off the bat. Nice. We got good manifold vacuum on this engine. It's super stock. You can tell it has a truck cam with all that manifold vacuum it's making. And now at this point, we can go do all of our fine tuning, clean this truck out, and hopefully go for a drive.